Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our brand new course, Colorful Profiles. It will be a 4-week journey exploring short stories of extraordinary and unexpected characters from Jewish history. Today we will be doing lesson 1, which is titled Courageous Converts. This afternoon and evening's lesson is available for sponsorship. As many of you know, we like to try and get 2 sponsors per lesson. It's $180 to sponsor a lesson. If you are available to do so, please let me know. I want to start off lesson 1 with a little bit of an introduction to the course as a whole, and then an introduction to lesson 1, if I may. So we all know that history is the stories of our people as they were in the past. But as the word itself would connote, any student who studies history as his story is wont to failure. Why? Because you're looking at stories from the past, and you're looking at them as his story or her story, but not your own story. And the truth is that, as we know, while perhaps it's not true that history repeats itself, because it never repeats itself in the same way, but history always repeats itself in the same lessons and the same truths and the same realities coming up again and again and again. And so it behooves us to explore our history, and not just to view it as someone else's story, but rather to view it as lessons that we can take from it for ourselves. And in this vein, the Jewish Learning Institute, which put together this course, has chosen to put together a history course that does not focus, it doesn't take the classic approach to history. It doesn't focus on the dates and the times and where was he and where was she and how, but rather it takes it through the eyes, sure, not giving a proper glimpse into the historical era, but through the eyes of one particular individual at a time. Over the course of the next 4 weeks, as a reminder, this is a 4-week course, we are going to explore 12 stories. We will not get to these individuals' full lives. I probably will not share with you the exact dates of when they lived and when they were born and when they died, and we don't even always know all these details. But what I hope you will get out of this is a powerful lesson that you see this person's life and they can inspire you to be better, whether to be more like them, whether not to be like them, well, hopefully most of them to be like them, right? Whether to just take a little small detail that captures your heart, and hopefully we can learn from these fellows. We're going to tell these stories through original sources, through historic documents, and through multimedia and music. Particularly today's lesson has 2 bits of music through which we'll be telling the story. And I think you'll find the adventures of these courageous people, these inspiring people, these fascinating people will inform your life. Each of the 4 lessons in this course focuses on a specific theme. And the characters that we'll be exploring that week will all be in that theme. I think some of you have seen this in the marketing of the course, but just in case, let me go through it. Lesson 1, excuse me, is titled Courageous Converts, and we'll discuss the lives of 3 fascinating non-Jews who then converted to Judaism. Lesson 2 is called Influential Jews, and we'll explore the lives of 3 Jews who, in some way, shape, or form, had a very powerful influence on the non-Jewish or general society around them. Lesson 3 is called Unsung Heroines. We will discuss the lives of 3 different female Jewish characters. And in Lesson 4, which is titled Heroes and Hostages, we will discuss the lives of 3, well, it's not really 3 people, it's 2 people, and then a group of 4 together, who all were in hostage crises. We like to think that this is the first crisis that ever happened. Unfortunately, it isn't. There have been many hostage crises from throughout history, and hopefully it will inform our approach to the hostage crisis that we unfortunately find ourselves in today in the land of Israel. So that's the 4 lessons in a nutshell. Before we dive into our first lesson, let me just remind you of some of what I call the housekeeping announcements, if you will, for this course. And they are, number 1, you should have received an email from me this morning at about 9 a.m. If you did not, that means that somehow my emails are either going to spam or somehow your registration is not fully complete and on the back end. It might not be your fault, might be my fault. To make sure that you're getting the emails, you can expect an email like that each week at 9 a.m. Reminding you that there's a lesson today. And then there is a follow-up email that goes out at 9:30 p.m., which will have attached to it a link to the recording of this Zoom class, as well as some tidbits that we might, links to the slides, tidbits that we might throw out during the lesson, such as websites that you might find interesting, or articles or book recommendations, etc. I tend to throw those out throughout the lesson, and then it's nice to be able to follow up with them, tell you guys, hey, if you want to check that out, here it is. This is a 4-week course, but each week we do the lesson twice. So this is my rehearsal, if you will, my final rehearsal. Makes you feel really good about today's lesson, huh? This is the first time I give the lesson at 1 o'clock p.m. Usually it's about a 90-minute lesson. We should be done, I try to be done by about 2:30. And then that's the Zoom class, and this evening is at 7:30. We do the class again, in person, same class. Some people like to come to both to see if I still say the same things. That one has dinner included with it, and you do not need to let me know which one you are coming to. You can come to the Zoom class, the in-person class, every other week. Whatever works for you that week, that's fine. We even have some people who only take the class via recording. So a little shout out to Wally Limbacher from the Valley, who likes the classes. He likes to attend the classes, but he listens to them, I don't know, I think like at 3-4 o'clock in the morning on his way to work or something. I don't know, some crazy schedule like that. And he likes to listen to the class each week. So Wally, welcome to you as well, even though we will never see you live during the classes. Okay. There is a textbook that's included with your class. I have one for each of you. If you have yet to pick it up, you are more than welcome to stop by anytime. You can text me if you want to make sure I'm here, but even if not, somebody will be here and they'll be able to let me into my office. And I have textbooks behind me on the shelf right here, those green books right there, right over my left shoulder. And those textbooks are yours to keep. You can feel free to make notes in it, to fill out the exercises, etc. The way we structure the lesson is that I talk for most of the time, but we like to bring the sources and the texts, etc. And so if you have that ability, I know today some of you don't have your textbooks, but if you have that ability to read for us, we'd love to hear you get involved. And without further ado, let's dive into Lesson 1, Courageous Converts. So, as with each week, I'd like to begin with a little introduction to Lesson 1. Today we are going to be talking about conversion. And as a result, I'd like to take a moment to give you a little bit of background and even a little bit of history to the theme of today's lesson, this theme of conversion, the fact that someone who was not born Jewish could actually convert and become Jewish. It might sound simple enough, like as if somebody was a Boston Red Sox fan and then they moved to New York and they converted to become a Yankees fan, but it's actually not so simple at all. Because, as with everything in Judaism, we don't just believe that what you see is what you get. We believe that there's much more to life. There's a spirituality behind everything. There's a spiritual energy behind everything. Behind human beings, for example, there is a soul. So what exactly does it mean that somebody was born not Jewish and then becomes Jewish? So let's get into it a little bit. I think in order to understand the basis of conversion, it's worth it to go back all the way to pre-organized religion, which usually is referred to as the times of paganism. In ancient times, each pagan tribe believed in its own god. So whether it was the god of a region, or they believed in the god of the oceans, or the god of fire, or the god of plenty, or the god of envy, or whatever it was, all of these different these respective gods. And by the way, it was viewed as that god was kind of your spiritual counterpart, if you will. And so, for example, when two nations battled each other, pardon the background of the young children who are also learning Torah, but just on a different level. They're marching through the hallway now. So if two nations, for example, two tribes battled each other, it was sort of understood that two gods were kind of having it out with each other, whichever one won had kind of vanquished the other god, and they now needed to submit to them, and therefore if a tribe was conquered by another tribe, they all automatically, so to speak, converted to their religion. Similarly, for example, a lot of religion in those days revolved around appeasing these gods. It was understood that if you couldn't keep these gods happy, if you didn't do what these gods wanted, then they wouldn't necessarily give you what you want. Seems like a little bit of an unfair setup to me, but that's the way things were back then. Paganism declined. So some people call it paganism, people call it tribalism. Paganism declined over the course of history, and in its place, we have what we know today as organized religion. Now, organized religion has usually to it, you can choose whichever religion you're most familiar with outside of Judaism, because we'll get to Judaism in just a moment, but organized religion usually has to it a couple of main factors. Number one is universalism, which means different than paganism. There's an understanding that there's one God, and this God created the world and oversees the entire world, and whatever your belief about that God is, I'm not getting into details of different types of Christianities, for example, or in Islam with Allah, etc., or what the roles of the prophets are, etc. But there's an understanding that the whole world, therefore, owes allegiance to this God. This is why every other religion in the world besides for Judaism, to the best of my understanding, it's every other religion, believes in another thing called proselytization. Why? Because proselytizing essentially means like this. I believe that, pick your particular name for a God, right? Created or is in charge or runs the world and brings goodness to everyone and loves everyone, etc., right? If that's the case, of course, if I know someone who doesn't believe in that, I must reach out to them and get them to believe in it because I believe that this is the universal truth, right? So universalism kind of leads to proselytization. Why? Because, and by the way, this is also why we find that it starts off friendly, right? Like, oh, in order to be saved, you need to believe in this one, or in order to go into paradise, you need to believe in that one, etc. While it might start off friendly, they then use that to excuse, sometimes, violence as a form of getting someone to believe in what they believe is the truth. Getting someone on board with the religion that they believe is the universal religion and the universal deity that we should be serving. Judaism affirms the first element of universalism, the idea that there is one God to the world. He created the entire world, and he runs the entire world, but rejects, and I think among the major religions, Judaism is the only one to do so, rejects the notion of proselytization. And actually, it's one of the things that I find most empowering about Judaism. Many of you know, I'm sure I've shared this with many of you either personally or in previous classes. For a period of about 3 to 4 years in my early 20s, I used to go every single Friday driving a massive RV, which we called a mitzvah tank. It had posters plastered on the side, come on board and do a mitzvah, etc. And I would drive it every Friday to Park Avenue, 53rd Street in Manhattan from Brooklyn. We would go over the bridge. And we would stand on the street corner and ask people if they were Jewish. And as a result, I mean, it might surprise you that not the entire Manhattan is Jewish. As a result, I had a lot of interactions with non-Jews who wanted to understand what is it we're doing and why they can't do it, right? So, for example, they might not know that we're asking people to put on tefillin, but they see that we're asking people if they're Jewish. Why are you asking them, right? And it was always one of my favorite conversations to have with people. Like, they would be like, oh, you're doing this spiritual, because everybody's familiar with religions, to one degree or another. And they would say, oh, you're doing this spiritual prayer ritual? What if I want to do it? Don't you want me to do it too? Don't you want me to connect to your religion as well? And I would always say, no. Do you believe in God? And they would say, yes. Most Americans, to some degree or another, believe in God. Do you go to, which religion do you ascribe? Oh, you're Christian? All right, I encourage you to go to church this Sunday. And they'd be like, what? I don't get it. Like, you're a very bad proselytizer. But actually, it was one of the most amazing things for me to be able to explain to people, because essentially it's the most respectful thing in the world. We are saying that, yes, there is one God, and he created the world, and he's the only one we should serve, but everyone can serve him in a different way depending on who they are. By the way, this trickles down also, this is way beyond the scope of today's conversation, but this trickles down into the difference between human beings as well. There's a way that children serve God. There's a way that those over bar and bat mitzvah serve God. There's a way that men or males serve God. There's a way that females serve God. And Judaism believes that each part of this massive organism that we call a human race has a unique role to play in the way that we serve God. The location that you live in, for example, plays a huge role. But bringing this back to the conversation that we began with, Jews and non-Jews each have their own role to play. And as a broad stroke view of religion from a Jewish perspective, Jews have 613 mitzvahs. Okay, many of them don't apply today because we don't have a temple, etc. By the way, that's another variance. That we believe that because we were born today where there is no temple, our job is not to bring sacrifices. Our job is to do other things, right? There are 613 mitzvahs for Jews, and then there are 7 universal laws for all mankind, known as the 7 Noahide laws, because the 7th one was given to Noah. The first 6 were actually given to Adam, and the 7th one was added to Noah. And this is why Judaism, so for example, when you talk about being saved, or being able to enter the world to come, or enter paradise, etc., Judaism rejects the notion that only Jews who believe in Judaism and who practice Judaism enter what in Hebrew is known as Gan Eden, or Olam Haba, right? The Garden of Eden, or the world to come. And that's where we are going to start our journey today. It's a quote from Maimonides, Danny, if I can ask you to read it for us, please. Text 1, righteous of the nations. If you have your textbook, we are on page 3.
The righteous individuals among the nations have a share in the world to come.
Okay? All right. Now, if you haven't yet noticed it, I've been setting myself up for really sticking my foot in my mouth. Why? Because the title of today's lesson is Conversion, where somebody has a full and legitimate identity, as we just discussed at length, from a Jewish perspective. Beautiful, you're a non-Jew, wonderful, serve God in your way, 7 no laws, etc. And yet, Judaism does allow for conversion. So it begs the question, what on earth is going on here? Right? What is the why wouldn't we say to somebody who wants to convert, no, there's no option for a non-Jew to become Jewish. You were born as a non-Jew. That means you're supposed to serve God in your way, and that's it. Right? So this is where text 2, which is Tosfot, and Daniel, I'll ask you to continue reading for us. This is Tosfot in Tractate Yevamot of the Talmud, kind of summarizes the Jewish approach to conversion. Text 2, conversion applications.
We do not attempt to convince people to convert to Judaism, and we do not immediately accept anyone that asks to convert. There will be severe divine consequences for any Jew that proselytizes. However, we do accept non-Jews that are persistent in their desire to convert.
Okay. So Tosfot says that I wasn't entirely wrong with my assumption that if somebody comes to convert, we should tell them no. In other words, the first thing we tell somebody who wants to convert to Judaism, and by the way, I do this all the time, as you can imagine, because as a Chabad center, which calls itself a Chabad outreach center, right, we get a lot of non-Jews that come knocking on our door. And they say, oh, I'd like to serve God as a Jew, etc. And my first approach to them, obviously we smile, welcome, come inside, etc. But my first approach, I tell them, I just want you to know that you don't need to become Jewish. We don't believe that you don't need to attend the prayers here. You can pray however you'd like, and usually one of the first things that I share with them are the 7 Noahide laws. So Tosfot says that actually Judaism doesn't just not seek proselytization. Actually, you have to be very, very careful about what you're doing. If a Jew decides to proselytize, it's not just that we don't actively encourage proselytization. If a Jew chooses to proselytize, he's playing with fire. Why? Because, and this is me explaining to you what Tosfot means here, but essentially what he's doing is he's coming over to a neshama, to a soul, because every single human being has a soul, that might have a role to play in this world as a non-Jew, and he might be literally confusing the soul and sending it down a wild goose chase of that it doesn't deserve, that doesn't fit with its mission and its raison d'etre here in this world. That's why Tosfot says it could be very grave consequences. Okay, but then Tosfot finishes off still saying that if someone is persistent, they can convert, right? And that's the million-dollar question. Why? Why would we allow any conversion to Judaism? The answer to this question is that converts to Judaism who insist on joining even though they were told there's no need actually had much more than a non-Jewish soul and a non-Jewish role even before they converted. Let's see how this is this unfolds from Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulai, otherwise known as the Chida, in text 3 on page 4. Ron, can you read for us? Do you have the PDF?
Yes.
Okay, so we're on page 4, text 3, converts from Sinai.
Our sages teach that when we received the Torah at Mount Sinai all those years ago, the soul of the convert who would join us only many generations later was already present. This soul was at the incredible event at Mount Sinai, although its actual joining our people was deferred until now.
Okay, so this is a real doozy, and I really want to take a moment to explain what's going on here. Without giving you just an insane amount of exhaustive texts, let me just explain a little bit of a contradiction that exists, okay? There is a statement in the Talmud. It goes like this. Ger shenizgayer kikatan shenolad dami. A convert who converts is like a child who is born. Okay? Why is this such a strange statement? Because on the one hand, let's start from the back to front. On the one hand, we're saying they're like a child who was born. So it's almost as if, like, until now, their life was, they didn't have a soul and they totally weren't fulfilling their life's purpose, etc. And now they're born again. They're born as a brand new child and they're starting the life all over again, etc. Right? So you would say, okay, beautiful, that makes sense. They're starting as a Jew, that's what they were supposed to be doing all along, but for some reason they didn't until now. Okay, beautiful. The problem is that when you go back to the beginning of the statement, it doesn't say Goy Shenis Gayer, a non-Jew who converts to Judaism. It says a convert who converts to Judaism. In other words, even before a convert converts to Judaism, he is known as a future convert to Judaism. Okay, we might only know about it once he converts, right? But obviously there was something that existed before. And that's because, in addition to a non-Jew who will then convert to Judaism, right? In addition to the regular soul that they have, which is a non-Jewish soul, which is supposed to connect to God through the 7 Noahide laws, there is an additional element, an additional spark. Now, it's not a complete soul. It's not a complete Jewish soul. They get that complete Jewish soul when they convert, and then they're completely Jewish. But before, so it's not as if they're just revealing something that was there all along, but there still was something there even beforehand, kind of like a ticking, driving force that was the spark of the soul, the spark of their Jewish soul, which then, which then comes to fruition into a complete Jewish soul after they convert to Judaism. And this is why, in text 3, which Ron just read for us, we're saying essentially like this. There were millions and millions of souls that were at Sinai, right? There's a dating website, anybody familiar with it? It's called Saw You at Sinai. It's a Jewish dating website because every Jewish soul was at Sinai. So what text 3 is essentially saying is, what text 3 is essentially saying is that even the Jewish soul of this non-Jew who then goes and converts to Judaism and gets this soul was also at Sinai. And so he has access to it, and it's really making him tick, and it's driving him, and that's part of why he converts. Because that part of that soul is within him and ticking and yearning to be Jewish, right? So then that soul then comes to its fruition or its completion, if you will, when he converts to Judaism, and he is then Jewish, obviously, like everyone else. Okay. This was kind of just an overview of what conversion looks like. But I think that therefore, understanding this background of what really is behind someone who converts to Judaism, it really makes it such a powerful statement to see that some of the converts to Judaism, are actually some of the most influential people insofar as the Jewish trajectory over time. For those of you, and I know there are some of you here, that are a little bit familiar with Jewish mysticism, and Tanya in particular, this is because the very fact that they were not Jewish beforehand meant that they were really steeped in what is known as klipas noga, right? For those that are familiar with that term. And therefore they bring with them these sparks from the world that then come to Judaism and in no surprising way influence Judaism in major ways. So today we're going to explore 3 of those converts and their stories. Let's dive into it, shall we? Any questions before we do? Okay, great. This is a perfect crowd. They're just going to let me project and talk. I love it. Okay. So let's start our journey with a man whose name was Onkelos. Okay? Raise your hand if you've heard of Onkelos before. I believe of the 12 characters we are going to explore over the course of these 4 weeks, Onkelos is probably the most well-known. Onkelos was a man who lived in the year 117. I'm sorry, I'm going to back up a little. I'm going to give you some of the reka, the background to when he lived. In the year 117 to the Common Era, there was a Roman emperor whose name was Trajan. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. He was a very, very oppressive emperor for the Jewish people. He died. Okay, now this is crucial. Why is this crucial? Because the next emperor to rise up is a man by the name of Hadrian. And in the beginning, the Jewish people were very, very optimistic that Hadrian would be a much better emperor and in terms of his relationship with the Jews. In fact, he promised the Jews, this was, remember, post-destruction of the Second Temple, it's pre the Bar Kokhba revolt, for those of you that know a little bit of those dates, so it's in between those two pretty major events in Jewish history, and he promises the Jewish people that they're going to be able to rebuild the temple. Now, as we know, because the temple wasn't rebuilt, that temple, had it been rebuilt, would have been the third and therefore final temple. Our tradition tells us that the third temple that will be built in Jerusalem will be the final temple, and that has been passed down for millennia. But, as you might have noticed, their hopes were not so well founded. Hadrian visited the land of Israel in 129 and met with the leading Jewish sages of the era. and he began to suspect that the Jews were going to rebel against him and seek their own independence. And so instead of allowing the construction of the temple, he rebuilt Jerusalem as, I always mispronounce this, Aelia Capitolina, a very Hellenist city. And on the site of the Holy Temple, he built a temple to the Roman god Jupiter. Certainly not very Jew-friendly activities during this time. In fact, it had the exact opposite effect. Instead of quelling the Jews and whatever rebellion he thought, this sparked and began a Jewish rebellion against Hadrian. This is what is known today as the Bar Kokhba revolt. Bar Kokhba, by the way, was a very, very monumental figure in Jewish history. He is one of the only, I think maybe the only one that we know of, but definitely one of the only characters in history that we know of as a failed Messiah. Not a false Messiah, but a failed Messiah. In other words, he fit all of the halachic criteria to be Mashiach, and there were even many very, very famous Jewish leaders at the time, including Rabbi Akiva, for example, who believed that he was or could have been at the time Mashiach, but because he wasn't successful in his mission, therefore he wasn't Mashiach. Right? But in other words, he fit the criteria to be what is known as Cheskes Mashiach, a potential Mashiach. Very, very different, for example, than Shabtai Tzvi, who was a false Mashiach. He never fit the criteria to begin with, but so he was a false Messiah. Anyways, leaving all this alone, after brutally putting down the rebellion, this was a crazy, crazy time. I believe the Talmud describes the destruction, the bloodshed that there was after the quelling of the Bar Kokhba revolt, as the streets of Jerusalem were running with blood ankle deep. That's how much blood there was from this war. And one of the most offensive moves that Hadrian did was, after he quelled the revolt, he renamed the area known as Judea, right, which was the Jewish part or the Jewish province of Israel today, as Syria, Palestina, in order to erase Jewish history. He didn't want anyone to know it as Judea. Of course not. That would be associated with the Jews, and so he gave it this other name. In fact, he named it after an ancient foe of the Jewish people known as the Philistines. By the way, till today, the word Palestine, which today has become such a loaded word, comes from this Roman emperor who renamed the province of Judea to Syria, Palestina. Of course, like any good non-Jewish anti-Semite, or I should say an anti-Semitic king or leader, he imposed rules and decrees against Jewish observance: no Shabbos, no Torah study, no circumcision. All of these things were outlawed under the Roman law at the time, and many, many, many sages and observant Jews were killed during that period. There's even a name for that period in Jewish law. It's called Doro Shel Shmad. Without getting into all these details. Okay. Now this emperor, Hadrian, who was quite the character, as you can imagine, fascinatingly, had a nephew whose name was Onkelos, and as we're going to see, he converted to Judaism. The conversion took place sometime before the Bar Kokhba rebellion. You'll soon see why I say that. And all of these Hadrianic persecutions, if you will. But still, conversion to Judaism for a member of the royal family was life endangering, even if it was before the Bar Kokhba revolt and all of these Hadrianic decrees. The Medrash tells us about Onkelos' conversion and his relationship with his uncle in text 4, which is called Conversion Journey. Elise, would you like to read it for us, please? We're on page 7. Conversion Journey.
Hebrew. Okay. Onkelos the convert was the son of Hadrian's sister. He wished to convert, but he was afraid of his uncle Hadrian. Onkelos told Hadrian, "I want to engage in business." "If you're lacking gold and silver," Hadrian replied, "my treasury is open for you." Onkelos said, "I wish to travel abroad on business in order to become acquainted with other people. I would like your advice about what investments to make." Hadrian replied, "When you see merchandise that is valued lowly and disregarded, invest in it. Eventually, its value will rise and you will make a profit." Onkelos traveled to the land of Israel and studied Torah. A while later, Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehoshua met Onkelos and noticed that his countenance was changing. They told each other, "Onkelos is studying Torah." As Onkelos became close to these scholars, he began asking them many questions, and they supplied him with explanations. Onkelos returned to his uncle Hadrian. Hadrian asked him, "Why has your countenance changed? Your business must have failed, or maybe someone is oppressing you." "No, I am your relative. No one would oppress me. So why has your countenance changed? I have studied Torah and even circumcised myself. Who advised you to do such a thing? I consulted with you. When? When I asked you what merchandise to invest in, you advised me. When you see merchandise that is valued lowly and disregarded, invest in it. Eventually, its value will rise. I traveled among all the nations of the world, and I could not find a nation as lowly valued and disregarded as the Jewish people. This nation is destined to rise." Hadrian's advisor told him, "Since Onkelos has converted, you should kill him." Hadrian replied, "My nephew Onkelos was destined to convert from the moment he was conceived."
Thank you very much. There's a couple things I want to point out here that are fascinating about this background. And we're not done with the story of Onkelos. But first of all, does anybody have a very, very dear friend that, they go about their life for 50 years and then they take on some major achievement? Maybe they become a doctor at the age of 50 or a lawyer at the age of 50, etc. And you go, "Oh my God, yes. I remember when he was a kid, he was such a lawyer. He was it was in him, right? Or whatever. Or he starts to volunteer after he retires in a certain field. And you're like, yeah, his whole life, I've seen that about him." So it's interesting to note that the spiritual is always reflected in the physical. So first of all, you see that Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, even before he converts, they see his countenance begin to change as he begins to study Torah. And when he converts, and then he comes back to the Emperor Hadrian, and we know from the introduction to our lesson that means that now he has a complete Jewish soul. It's interesting that even Hadrian is able to recognize it on his face. He can see on his countenance, on his style, he can see that something is different about him. The spirituality is reflected in the physicality. And then you see that even once Hadrian learns about it, he's surprised, but he's not surprised, right? He's like, "Oh, my nephew Onkelos was destined to convert from the moment he was conceived," which I think is very, very telling. It's very telling about, because these are people that didn't like the Jews at all, and Hadrian's reaction could have been something very different. He could have been, I mean, even if it was before the Bar Kokhba revolt, and I don't know exactly what his relationship was with the Jews at this particular time, but it was still a very, very bold move for Onkelos just to tell his uncle that, and for his uncle to instead of killing him, instead of banishing him, instead of whatever, right, and having him see a priest like that he can convert to Allah or whatever it is, his reaction is, "Oh, yeah, I get it. I see that in you." Anyways, what we didn't get in this text is what was the motivation for Onkelos's move to convert to Judaism under these life-threatening, so to speak, situations, or whatever, or says, under this life-threatening scenario background. It's not exactly clear, but perhaps the next text will shed some light on this. The section of the Talmud that the story of Onkelos that we just read, it was from the Medrash in Tanchuma. We are now going to jump to the Talmud in Avodah Zarah, which is on the tractate of the Talmud, which discusses Onkelos' story again, but this time tells us a little bit more about what happened post. So after this episode where Hadrian re-met was exposed to his nephew who had already converted, and then they part ways again, etc. And Hadrian's attempts at trying to get Onkelos to come back. Let's take a look at text 5, if you will. Danny, can you read for us, please? Thwarted Missions, page 9.
Okay. Onkelos, the son of Kelonimus, converted to Judaism. The Roman emperor sent a troop of Roman soldiers to seize him and bring him to the emperor. However, Onkelos attracted them to Judaism with Torah passages that he cited for them, and they converted. The emperor dispatched a second troop of Roman soldiers after Onkelos and ordered them to avoid discussion with him. As the soldiers arrested Onkelos and led him away, he said to them, "Let me tell you something trivial. A minor official holds a torch in front of a high official. The high official holds a torch for a duke for the governor for the emperor. Now, does the emperor hold a torch before the common people? No, the soldiers replied. Onkelos continued, yet God holds a torch in front of the Jewish people, as the Torah states. God went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way for them, and by night in a pillar of fire to provide light for them. The entire troop converted to Judaism. The emperor dispatched a third troop of soldiers to arrest Onkelos. He ordered them not to talk to Onkelos at all. As the soldiers were leading Onkelos away, he saw a mezuzah affixed to a doorpost. He placed his hand on the mezuzah and turned to the soldiers, asking, "What is this?" "You tell us," the soldiers replied. Onkelos explained to them, "It's standard practice throughout the world for a mortal king to sit inside his palace whilst his servants guard him from the outside. But not so the God of Israel. His servants, the Jewish people, sit inside their homes whilst he guards them from the outside. Thus it's stated, God shall guard your departure and your arrival from now to eternity." When the soldiers heard this, they also converted to Judaism. Consequently, the emperor sent no more soldiers after Onkelos.
Thank you, Danny. Obviously, this is a fascinating story. But what I'd like to try and talk about is, even though we have no proof that this is what attracted Onkelos to Judaism, but it is fascinating that when he's converting other people to Judaism and the conversations that he's having with them, he's choosing to have the same theme of a conversation every single time. We're not going to quote him, but the Kuzari, and Maimonides as well, make a point. These are some of the famous Jewish philosophers, if you will, that talk about the axioms upon which Judaism is built. They talk about the fact that Judaism doesn't just believe in a God who created the world and then is removed from the world, but rather that Judaism believes in an active relationship with God. God is there for the Jewish people. There are ups, there are downs, there's a pull and a push, there's a give and a take between the relationship between the people of the world and God. And in Judaism's approach, that doesn't mean always that the Jewish people are serving God. That is a big part of it. But we also believe that God takes care of us. We believe that God watches over us, and God, like a father to his children, right? There's an element of servant serving his master, but there's also the element of a father watching over his children. And it's interesting that as each of these groups comes, Onkelos continues to point that out. And remember, this is at a time when people mainly believed in paganism. Because the reason I'm saying to remember that is because in paganism, your goal is to make the God happy. There is no discussion about what God does for you and how you should be grateful for the things that God does to you. No, it's all about appeasing the gods, right? And Judaism would have stood out to Onkelos as a very, very different kind of religion. A religion in which you have a relationship with God, in which God has needs that you can fill, that he creates those needs in order for you to be able to fill them, right? And God comes and watches over you and cares for you and loves you, and even when take a look in the prayers that we say throughout on every day, and then on the high holidays, when we say that even when someone is far off the way, God is ready for them to come back, etc., and he's always watching them and guarding them and loving them, etc. So perhaps this was some of what appealed to Onkelos as a non-Jew and then as a convert to Judaism. Now Onkelos, by the way, he's mentioned in multiple other times in the Talmud, which we're not going to get into. And he's mentioned in Tractate Gittin, he's mentioned in all sorts of places. But Onkelos also stands out as a ger, a convert who didn't just come to Judaism, but actually came and contributed something else to Judaism. As many of you, I think, on this Zoom and those that are watching the recording know, Judaism has a major barrier, and that is the language. Judaism began in Hebrew and places a holiness on Hebrew, and as a result, if somebody comes, this past Friday was the yahrzeit of Rabbi Hanoka's father, right, Jack Hanoka or Yaakov Hanoka, Dr. Yaakov Hanoka, I should say. And this was famously something that he said, that he came to be a Baal Teshuvah. He wanted to return to Judaism. He grew up very secular. He knew he was Jewish, and he wanted to re-embrace Yiddishkeit in all of its details. And it was very difficult for him that he had a very rudimentary Hebrew. And that was one of the first things he needed to do, was to work on his Hebrew. And there were very little translations around them. Today, thank God, between Chabad and some other very hardworking organizations, a lot of that has changed, and there's a lot available in English, right? But if we go all the way back to the times of Onkelos, and at that time, the Torah had yet to even be translated. Now, in case you think, oh, yeah, that's because everybody spoke Hebrew. That is absolutely not the case. We're living in Talmudic times. The spoken language of the Jewish people at the time was the local language, which was Aramaic. True, more similar to Hebrew than English is, or than Spanish is, or than French is, but still a very different language. And for someone like Onkelos who would come to study Torah, the first thing he would need is a translation into Aramaic. And so Onkelos, who became a student, by the way, of Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer, who we mentioned earlier, who were leading Torah scholars at the time, he took their teachings, and under their guidance, he embarked on a monumental project. And what was that? Where are we here? Ron, can you read for us, please? Text 6. A monumental translation. We're on page 12.
The Aramaic translation of the Torah was composed by Onkelos the convert, who had learned it from Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua.
Now, interestingly, Onkelos's, who obviously had a personal understanding of the language barrier, Onkelos's translation doesn't just translate. In fact, you see in his translation that he's an expert in the art of translation. To take words and just translate them into another language as the same words will never do justice to the intent of the author. And as a result, very, very often, Rashi and other later commentary that are considered foremost commentary on the Torah will often, as a way of explaining something, just say, look at how Onkelos chose to translate it, and then you'll understand what it means, even if you don't understand Aramaic. Forget that. Just look at the fact that he chose to translate this word with this word, which is not an exact translation. But he veered off a little bit in order to make it understood. They'll use that as commentary on the Torah. In other words, Onkelos' translation, which is not necessarily precise, it's very precise by design, right? But it's not always literal, is actually a commentary as well. In addition to a translation, it is a commentary as well on the Torah. And it is actually the first translation of the Torah that was accepted all over Jewish circles. And as a result, in many, many ancient, as you can see on the screen, many ancient, or in your textbook on page 12, the text of the Torah is often, in many chumashim that are printed today, the text of the Torah is accompanied by the translation of Onkelos on the side. As you can see here, the purple is Targum Onkelos, the translation of Onkelos the Ger, Onkelos the convert. We're running a little bit behind time, but I'm still going to stick to the script, which is that I have made a decision that I'd like to pause between each character that we speak about in each lesson to discuss them. This kind of wraps up the conversation I want to have about Onkelos, but I'd love to hear what you guys think about this man and what his contribution to Judaism was, and his relationship and his devotion to Judaism, etc. What are your thoughts about this? Anybody want to? What are lessons you think you can take from Onkelos' life? Anybody want to jump in here? Go ahead, Dan.
Seems he was up for a challenge. He wasn't dissuaded by a challenge.
In other words, there was a certain persistence, you're saying, that he had. Once he felt something was true or something was important, he was persistent about it.
Well, he had no background in Judaism, and not only did he embrace the Jewish religion, but actually was motivated to take on an enormous challenge with his translation.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to jump in here? Elise, what are your thoughts about Onkelos?
That he didn't care what anybody thought or what he should do. He just went with what he felt in his heart.
He wasn't embarrassed.
He wasn't embarrassed. He didn't care the consequences. He followed his true.
I love it.
Path.
Okay. And with that, go again. Were you going to say something else? Okay. All right. And with that, we will continue to character number 2 for today, or profile number 2 of today's lesson, which is Ovadia the convert. Ovadia Hager. The convert that we are going to discuss as profile number 2 for today's lesson is a lot lesser known. Raise of hand. Anybody ever hear of Ovadia the Ger? Ovadia Hager? No. We had almost all the hands for Onkelos. For Ovadia, we have almost nobody. Ovadia Hager, the reason many of you don't know about him is because he was not known to students of Jewish history until recently. And that has a lot to do with something called the Cairo Geniza. Raise of hand if you've heard of the Cairo Geniza, if you're familiar with what it is. Okay. Let me, for those of you that are not, let me give you that background. There is a shul that is extant until today, which is called the Ben Ezra Synagogue. The Ben Ezra Synagogue is a shul which probably none of you have been to in Egypt. Anybody has anybody been? Raise your hands. You have. That would be fascinating if somebody had been to Egypt and been to the Cairo shul. The Ben Ezra Synagogue, like many shuls around the world, including ours, had a section of the shul that was called the Geniza. Okay, the Geniza, which literally translates into hiding place or storage, is essentially a part of the shul. I'll soon clarify the difference between the one they had in Cairo and the one we have in our shul, where texts that have Hashem's name on it or that have Torah study on it that are not meant to be just discarded willy-nilly are actually treated with respect and discarded in the way that Judaism prescribes for these sorts of texts, namely to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. Okay, now today, one of the Genizas at Chabad Pasnina is right behind me, that white box. Does anybody see it? So for example, if you've ever wondered, can you see the white box right there on my shelf, right here, this one? So with a little slit on the top, there's a garbage bag in there. And if you've ever wondered where the little scroll pamphlets that I put out each week, where they go when you're done reading them, seeing as they have Torah thoughts on them, they go into that box, as does other different, whatever, like an extra siddur page that fell out that can't be put back in or whatever it is. Anything that we treat as holy goes into there, and that gets brought eventually to a larger one. There's like in the yeshiva in Los Angeles, for example, they have a container, a shipping container that has like slots on the side of it, and many shuls bring their stuff there. You pay them a fee, and you can give them a whole garbage bag. And they take care of once a year or a couple times a year, burying that in a Jewish cemetery. In Cairo, there was a built-in Geniza. So in other words, they had, I don't know if there were slots or however it worked, but the Geniza went underground into a designated room or chamber or whatever it was. And remember, this is before the era of printing. So there was a lot less Geniza, but a lot more valuable Geniza, thousands of years later, or hundreds of years later. And for generations, because this was a very old shul. I mean, the Rambam, for example, attended this shul. Maimonides, who lives over 1,000 years ago. And for generations upon generations, people are putting things into the Cairo Geniza. They're putting documents, loan documents that have Hashem's name on it, or for whatever reason it's going to the Geniza. They're putting old Sepharim, old Jewish books. And it's fascinating because when they discovered the Cairo Geniza, which was, give me a second, I'll give you the date, in the late 19th century, when the existence and importance of this Geniza became known to academic scholars, they started to sift through it. The whole thing was digitized. Today you can see the entire thing online. I think it's from Cambridge University. I don't remember exactly. And there were lots and lots of discoveries there. As always with Jewish history, a lot of the discoveries were valuable in that they confirmed and affirmed certain things which we knew but didn't have any historical proof to. So for example, there were, there were old Torahs there. And to have the text of a Torah that was over 1,000 years old, right, or over 1,500 years old, depending, what generation it was from, was fascinating to be able to compare and contrast that. There were prayer books, and to be able to see certain old prayer books and then be able to compare them with the prayer book today and see how things evolved over time with other old prayer books that are only a few hundred years old, etc., was fascinating. Haggadahs. Another one of the fascinating things that happens there is there were even portions of Jewish books which were considered extinct, but which we knew about their existence because of quotations that appear in other books. So this is a whole world that I don't want to get into right now, but basically in many Jewish commentary are often quoting other commentary that maybe were very popular at their time, but of which we have no extant copies to date. And this is one of the saddest things as you study. I mean, it's just a product of being such an old literature, right? But the fact that Torah has been studied for thousands of years means that sometimes you see one scholar quoting another scholar, and maybe he's even saying something on the topic you want to read, but that book doesn't exist today. And there are even like some of the more popular ones that are quoted. There are even like collections where people will put together all the quotes of different commentary that quote, and they'll put them together to have whatever we have. And then not often, but there were some cases in the Cairo Geniza where those pieces were found, and then they were able to like kind of, cross-reference and see that this was the book that was quoted in this book, etc. One of the things that was found in the Cairo Geniza was an autobiography. A biography written, not in first person, it's written in third person, but it's written by the actual protagonist, if you will. And we can do no better than to actually dive into it. If you'd like, you can read it with me on page 13. Or if you feel like that might be a little bit difficult to read that, that manuscript, we have it for you in text 7 on page 14. Elise, can you read for us, please? Ovadiah's birth. So the book starts off with a narrative. Elise, don't forget to unmute yourself. With a narrative that I think many of you will find familiar, and it's being written in that way, obviously, intentionally. Go ahead. Text 7, page 4.
Whose name is Opido, he took a wife named Maria, and Maria conceived and bore unto Drex, her husband, 2 sons on the same day, the firstborn according to the usual manner of women, as to their children, to whom they gave the name of Jarius, that is Rogier. As for the second, his lower parts came out first, his mother bearing him with great pain. She gave him the name Johannes, this is Giovan. The youth grew up. Rogerius became a man who sought the sword and warfare, whereas Johannes became a man seeking knowledge and wisdom in books.
Anybody recognize the story? The author is choosing to tell the story of his own birth, reflecting or employing the language of the biblical narrative of the birth of Yaakov and Esau, Jacob and Esau from Yitzchak and Rivka. And similar to those two children, there are twin boys, and the first one becomes a warrior, and the second one becomes a scholar. By the way, this was very common in Europe in those days, that the older son would become a knight and the protector and provider of the family, and that the second son would be educated by the church to become a religious scholar. This was a very common practice at that point. At some point, right? So our protagonist's name is Johannes. At some point in his childhood, the studious Johannes's world was rocked by a bombshell report that reached his town, and that is that the Archbishop of Bari had converted to Judaism. Danny, can you read for us, please? Text 8. Shocking news.
One sec. Okay. It happened at that time regarding Archbishop Andreas, the high priest of the city of Bari, that the Lord put the love of the Torah of Moses into his heart. He forsook his land, his priesthood, and all his glory, and came to the city of Constantinople, where he circumcised the flesh of his foreskin. He endured sufferings and hardships. He arose and fled for his life from before the Gentiles seeking to slay him. But the Lord God of Israel saved him from their hands in purity. The Lord protects proselytes. Blessed be the Lord forever. Many went up after him, and observing his deeds, they did as he had done. They also entered the covenant of the living God. All the sages of Edom or Christendom were ashamed when they heard the report about him. Johannes heard of the events concerning him while he was still a youth in the house of Drux, his father.
Okay. So this story, as you can imagine, must have made a deep impression on the young Johannes, and it certainly played a role in his later conversion to Judaism. But it seems like at this point, the author is telling us this is when the seed began to germinate. Around the year 1096, Johannes was ordained as a priest, and at this time he had a dream in which he saw himself standing in the church in Oppido. Unfortunately, at this point, the fragments of the autobiography are missing many pieces, so we don't know the exact details of the vision that he saw in the dream. The words that we can make out indicate that it had something to do with the crusades that were being waged at that time. The autobiography picks up, this is the next page on page 16, with Obadiah's description of his reaction to his dream. In an effort to decipher its meaning, he decided to study the entire Torah from beginning to end in its original Hebrew. All right, let's see text 9. Oh, hold on a second. Nope. I have to give you a little more. It doesn't tell us the details. The autobiography doesn't tell us the details about his actual conversion. We get details about how he wished to study the Torah in its original Hebrew, and obviously that led, to one degree or another, to his conversion. Hold on just one second. I'm not sure who this is. Somebody's arriving now for the class. But I want to say something right about now. It is possible that it is intentional that Johannes is omitting the details of his actual conversion. And the reason, let's discuss those reasons a little later. But the next piece that we are going to explore is going to be a page from a siddur that Ovadia wrote out for himself to pray from, also found in the Cairo Geniza. And the inscription gives us a date for the conversion, which corresponds to August/September 1102. Okay, so in 1096 he has the dream. 6 years later he has reached the point of conversion. And now we have the date for the conversion. Where was the conversion done? It turns out to go to another document that was found in the Cairo Geniza, a document that was written by Rabbi Baruch ben Yitzchak of Aleppo in what is today Syria. We have a document that basically serves as like a cover letter, like a certification of sorts for the conversion that Rabbi Baruch ben Yitzchak of Aleppo, who we know as a scholar from, outside of this story, we don't know too much about him, but we do know some of his commentary on Talmudic tractates, etc. We have a cover letter that he writes describing post facto, because he wasn't the one who converted Johannes, but post facto giving kind of a certification to the conversion. And we'll talk more about this in just a moment. But Ron, if you can read to us, please, this document. It's on page 18, text 9, the conversion process. You can see the actual certification, the original, in figure 1.6. This is one of the coolest courses because we can actually see the documents that we're quoting. Like, we're not just quoting from books, we're quoting from historical documents and artifacts, etc. from throughout history. Go ahead.
To all places of worship and study, unto whom this letter shall reach, may they be granted myriad measures of peace. This man, the bearer of our letter, came to our city with an epistle from some sages who dwell in his lands. They told us that this man is of a great family, that his father was an important officer, and that this man, Obadiah, is expert in the reading of their Christian religions books. Because of his understanding of what he read in their erroneous books, he returned to the Lord of Israel with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his strength, and became a proselyte in a law court of Israel. When he came to convert, they informed him that the Israelites were in sorrow, oppressed, despised, and scorned. He said to his informants, "Do I not know that the Israelites are despised and scorned? If only I would be worthy to join Israel." After it was discerned that he came out of love, they informed him of some lenient and some severe commandments, and they informed him of the punishment for infractions of the commandments. When he accepted all of the conditions, they circumcised him immediately, and when he was healed, they ritually immersed him. There were two sages there standing on either side of him, and they also reminded him of some lenient and some severe commandments. Thus was he made an Israel for every matter. And now our other brethren, blessed may be may you be unto heaven. Be careful of the honor of this man. Take care that you not injure him with words, that he be not injured by words of, for the Lord has warned against injury and oppression toward him, as our rabbis taught. He who wounds the feelings of a proselyte transgresses 3 negative injunctions. This letter was written in our own hand by our master Baruch, the great and outstanding master. May he be guarded by heaven, son of our master Yitzhak. May his soul rest in peace. Our master Baruch wrote this letter that it might be kept by Obadiah the convert for use in all communities of Israel to which he might go.
Fascinating. So this letter informs us that Ovadia, by the way, so far we have 3 different documents pointing to this story of Ovadia Hager. But this letter informs us that Ovadia, who was a young priest, had become disillusioned with the Christian theological studies, and instead had converted to Judaism after studying Torah and mitzvot, etc. There's a few things I want to point out here. Number one is, Rabbi Baruch of Aleppo, right? Rabbi Baruch ben Yitzchak of Aleppo, is telling us that he saw a letter written by the rabbis who converted Yohannes to become Ovadia Hager. But for some reason, that letter doesn't seem to be around. And not only does it not seem to be around, Ovadia prefers to take this other cover letter, which informs people about the other letter, to take that around as his certificate of his conversion, as opposed to a letter written by the actual rabbis who converted him. The reason for this seems most likely similar to why in his autobiography he doesn't talk about the actual conversion. And that is because this would have been a very, very dangerous time to convert to Judaism. The 1000s and the 1100s, the early 1100s, I guess we're talking about, was not a time that it was considered very okay to convert to Judaism. By the way, for example, you'll see that Ovadia Hager seems to stick away from Jerusalem and does not go to Israel, a place where I'm sure he would have wanted to go, but at the time was, this is the time of the Crusades. That would not have been a very safe place for someone who was Christian and converted to Judaism. Wouldn't have been a safe place for him to be hanging out. But perhaps even more telling than that is the fact that he doesn't want to give away the names of the rabbis. Even in the cover letter, the new rabbi who's just saying, I saw the letter and I can tell you that it's well-ordained rabbis and the whole process was done properly, and he describes the process, etc. But he leaves out the names of the rabbis who converted him. Because if you think it would have been dangerous for a priest to be wandering around saying, I now don't believe in Christianity, I believe only in Judaism, imagine how dangerous it would have been for the rabbis who had converted him, or who had, so to speak, stolen him away from Christianity, etc. So because of these dangers, you see this like kind of haziness and blurriness that's being given to the story. Anyways, that seems to be the most reasonable explanation. I also want to point out that this letter is one of the oldest letters to actually describe the conversion process. We have it described in the Talmud, but how it's supposed to be done. And that process stays still today, but it's interesting to see it in practice over 1,000 years ago. And that process always follows the same steps. Number one, discouragement. Number two, if they insist and persist, they need to learn the obligation of mitzvot and their divine consequences, the rewards and punishment for every mitzvah through the whole process. And then circumcision, of course, for a man, and eventually immersion in the mikvah and acceptance of all 613 commandments in the Torah, not some and some, but to go through the whole process properly as prescribed by the Talmud. So this is a fascinating insight into that process. Now, this also shows us something fascinating about conversion and not just conversion, but the acceptance of converts to Judaism. Judaism has always been very, very wary of someone coming and saying that they're converting to Judaism, but not actually converting to Judaism. Just, all right, I like Shabbos, so I'm going to start keeping Shabbos. No problem, a person's welcome to do that, but that's not considered a proper conversion to Judaism. If you're going to convert to Judaism, there's a process by which it needs to be done, and it needs to be done according to the law as described in the Talmud that comes from the Torah. So Ovadia is walking around with some sort of certificate. He doesn't want the original certificate, but he does need a certification of the fact that he converted to Judaism. Now, there is one more very fascinating document that we have from Ovadia Hager. And this one is going to be presented in a video. Oh, hold on a second. Hold on. I can't skip a whole section. Ovadia Hager continues to wander about. And Danny, if you can read for us, please, about some of his wanderings in text 10 on page 20.
Ovadia the convert then went from the city of Maxin and came to Rehovot, which is upon the river Euphrates. Then Ovadia the convert came to the city of Adina, which is Baghdad, capital of the Ishmaelites. Then came upon him tribulations, and the Gentiles sought to slay him, but the Lord God saved him. Ovadia the convert came, and he stood before the doorway of the synagogue, the academy. The servant installed Ovadia the convert in the house in which the Jews would pray, and they brought him provisions. It happened thereafter that Yitzhak, the head of the academy, directed that Ovadia the convert be with the orphan youths in order to teach him the Torah of Moses, the words of the greatest of the prophets in the script of the Lord and the language of the Hebrews.
Thank you, Danny. This is probably the saddest part of Ovadiah's autobiography, because it shows us that he continually needed to wander as a direct result of his conversion to Judaism. He didn't just flee his home in Italy for Aleppo, but his life was in danger in Baghdad, and he saw his deliverance as an act of divine protection. We see how the Jewish community in Baghdad heeds well the Jewish laws about caring for converts that Rabbi Baruch had reiterated in his letter. Va'ahavtem es hager, the importance of once somebody converts properly, to accept them with all your heart and soul. And they give him material support, etc., all this, but he continues to wander and to travel and never seems to really find rest. Ovadiah's autobiography goes on to tell us about anti-Semitic persecutions that the Jews in Baghdad suffered from the local Muslim ruler. And at this point, Islam is already around. And about 2 false Jewish messiahs, again, not failed messiahs, but false messiahs that arose at the time. And how the Jewish people were mocked by their Muslim neighbors when their hopes were dashed. Ovadia then eventually moves back to Syria in the year 1121, and then he travels on a journey to Cairo, Egypt, passing through northern Israel on the way. And again, he tells the story of another false messiah at the time, a man named Solomon, who claimed to be Mashiach. He was a Jew who was a part of the Karaite sect, much more on them another time, those who rejected the oral tradition but accepted the written tradition of the Jewish people. Ovadia seems to be too sharp and knowledgeable to even, and obviously also well-traveled. So which I know came as a result of negativity, but in fact served also to give him the experience of seeing, seeing through these false messiahs. So it doesn't seem that he was never fooled by any of these messianic pretenders, if you will. And he notes that Solomon, for example, claimed to be a Kohen from the tribe, which obviously comes from the tribe of Levi. And he's like, we have a very, very good Jewish tradition that Mashiach is going to be from the tribe of Judah, right? Because he's going to be a descendant of King David, who was from the tribe of Judah. Anyways, I mentioned earlier that glaringly missing is a visit to Jerusalem and to central Israel, where I'm sure he would have wanted to go, and he was clearly very close, but probably he stuck away from because of the fear for his life to go to Jerusalem while it was under Crusader rule. Eventually, Ovadia makes his way to Egypt. This is his long trip, right, to Cairo, Egypt. And at that point, his autobiography kind of cuts out, and we don't know anything about his life in Egypt, nor do we know when he died. There's quite a few other very, very fascinating, and this is what I want to end with, and this is what I was saying earlier. There's quite a few other fascinating documents that we have from Ovadia Hager, and a few, I think 3 of them, and one of them is the one we're going to highlight today, are actually liturgical poems set to musical notes. I don't know what the oldest record of musical notations is, but this has got to be up there, over 1,000 years old, and there's musical notes so that we can not only know the words to the poems that he wrote, to these liturgical poems, but actually decipher the tune. And what we're about to watch is actually going to be a reproduction of this poem set to the musical notes that Ovadia Hager himself composed. A few things you will note. Number one, it's going to be in the ancient Egyptian style, which is where he was at the time when he composed it. Another thing you will note is that it is a Shavuot song. There are many different poems that are written about Shavuot and the giving of the Torah at Sinai, etc. And this one begins with, "Who stood upon Mount Horeb and heard the order, stand with me," which is, all these things are a description of Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, and you'll see that each line ends off with the word Kimoshe, which means like Moses. The first stanza and the second stanza always rhyme with each other. In other words, the first half of the stanza and the second half of the stanza always rhyme with each other. And I'll let the song do the rest of the talking. If you'd like to follow along on the actual manuscript, you can see that on page 23. But it will also be in the video, and although it's a little faded, they're going to fill it in as they sing the songs with the best job that scholars have been able to do to decipher exactly what is written in this poem. So please turn your attention to the video screens.
Ovadia the convert wrote the oldest surviving piece of Jewish sheet music. These pages were preserved in the Geniza storage room of Cairo's Ben Ezra synagogue, which Ovadia would have frequented. Recently renovated, the Ben Ezra synagogue still stands in its original location. This is the song.
It seems that the fact that the oldest Jewish sheet music was written by a convert is not a coincidence. What I mean by that is like this. The style of the musical notes is Italian, very, very recognizable as Italian. to scholars. Not that I would recognize ancient Italian music, but apparently it is. And it would make sense that Ovadia, who was a convert, brought this style of music with him when he converted to Judaism, and then incorporated it and made it a part of Judaism. And till today, we have these beautiful different compositions that he composed, which are considered Jewish music now. And I think that tells us a lot about why, from a cosmic perspective, from a spiritual, intention perspective, why converts would be such an important part of Judaism. And with this, I'm going to conclude our conversation about Ovadia Hager. And I'd love to hear from you guys what it is that you learned from Ovadia.
Great music.
I feel he has great music. Anything else?
Yeah, I think that's Gregorian chant, isn't it?
I don't know. My understanding is it's ancient Italian style music.
Yeah.
Which he's composing in Cairo, by the way.
Yeah. Okay.
But with this, we will conclude our conversation about Ovadia the convert, who wrote the first Jewish musical notations that we have to date. Okay. Are we ready for the third and final character for today?
Yes.
Okay. Danny, you're going? Yeah, I'm sorry that we ran a little late, and then this technical glitch is definitely not helping, but hopefully you'll be able to watch the recording later. Okay, the third character about whom we are going to talk today is known as Avraham ben Avraham, or the famous Ger Tzedek of Vilna, the famous righteous convert of the city of Vilna. And this story takes place in the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the mid-18th century. And the protagonist is a young Polish nobleman by the name of Valentin. He was a member of the famous Potocki family, so the local word for noble was Graf, so he's known as Graf Potocki. And when he converted to Judaism in Amsterdam, he became Avraham ben Avraham. The name Avraham, of course, is the name that is used as the father for all converts to Judaism, because they trace their lineage directly to Abraham without any other son after son process in between. By the way, this is also the same for someone whose mother is Jewish, which makes them Jewish, but they have a non-Jewish father. They trace their lineage directly to Abraham, our forefather. And in a case where somebody, a ger tzedek, a righteous convert, would choose the name Avraham for themselves, they would then become Avraham ben Avraham, Avraham the son of Avraham. Now, conversion to Judaism in Lithuania, in Poland and Lithuania at the time, was illegal. And it carried the most severe consequences, as we will see in our story. Not only was conversion itself prohibited, but even discussion of conversion was prohibited. So the story that we are going to say today was passed on orally from generation to generation. In other words, for a long time, it was not even written down. There were only brief mentions of it coming up in print here and there, with just hints to this famous story about this particular convert to Judaism. The first time the story appears in print is in 1862 in a small booklet that is titled Gerei HaTzedek, which means the righteous converts. That's where our first text 12, comes from. It was published in a city then named Johannesburg in the Kingdom of Prussia, which is now a city named Pij in Poland, where strict Christian censorship laws didn't operate and Jewish publishing flourished for a very, very brief period of time. We'll use this dramatized version of the story as our primary source for the traditional account, instead of just telling it over to you orally and as it would have been passed down traditionally throughout the generations. Ron, can you please read for us text 12? It's a long one, but this will be the basic story, and then we'll kind of get a little more critical on it from other texts. Go ahead.
Okay. The year was 5479, which is 1719. A Polish nobleman named Potocki had a brilliant son. The local university in Vilna was no longer sufficient for the boys, so his father sent him to study in Paris. At the same time, a nobleman in the region of Samogitia named Zarimbe also had a brilliant son, and he was also sent to study in Paris. The two young men became very close friends. One day, as the two young men were strolling in a garden, they happened across an old man reading a book, engrossed in study. Impressed by the way the old man was studying, the young men asked, "What is the name of the book you are studying? What are its contents? Theology or some other subject?" The old man told him, "It is the book of the divine Torah. Please teach us from this precious book." The young man asked the venerable elderly scholar, "We also wish to learn this Torah of truth." "My dear children," the old man responded, "I cannot teach you from this book because you will not understand its contents and style. Also, you are forbidden from studying this book by law because it is contrary to your religion. Listen to us, wise old man," the young student said. "God has blessed us with great intelligence. Have mercy on us and teach us this dear Torah. Do not be afraid of the government. We will keep it secret. Please do this for us and show us the light." The old man had mercy on the students and studied with them. They studied Torah for 6 months and understood it well. They recognized that the Jewish religion is the truth and could no longer tolerate their religion. "Can we just stay here all our lives?" they asked each other. "Let us travel to Amsterdam, and there we will convert."
All right. The friends, by the way, did not go directly to Amsterdam. The story continues that Valentine was still plagued by doubt. He wasn't sure about this, and he wanted to learn more about the Christian faith. You know, why leave the Christian faith if it might indeed be correct? So he resolves to investigate the matter thoroughly. So he travels actually to the Vatican in Rome, where the Pope and the most learned Christian theologians lived. He told his father he wants to go to Rome, and his father was happy and sent him money for his voyage. But his friend, Zarembe, that's my pronunciation, Ron, but yours could have been more correct, I don't know, couldn't afford the trip to Italy, so he remained behind. And the story continues that they both eventually converted, but that's not the story we're telling today. Valentine traveled to Rome alone, and after a short time there, he came to the conclusion that Christianity was not the real faith, and he travels to Amsterdam and he converts in Amsterdam. Why Amsterdam? A few reasons. First of all, it's very likely that since conversion was such a taboo topic in Lithuania and Poland, he wants to go somewhere where no one would know who he is. Secondly, Amsterdam was a very multicultural city at the time. There wasn't as strict Christian religious authority. And as a result, he would have been able to do what he wanted to do. He takes the name Avraham ben Avraham, and at the time Jews didn't have surnames, so he was known as Avraham ben Avraham, and he converts to Judaism. After studying under the rabbi in Amsterdam for a few years, this young man named Avraham makes a dangerous decision. He wants to move back to the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. He was still careful, tried to stay under the radar. He didn't go to any places where he had been known under his previous identity. And instead he settles down in a small town named Ilya. Elise, can you read for us, please? About how he would spend his days in the synagogue. This is text 13. About how he would spend his days in the synagogue engrossed in study and prayer. But one day...
I'm at a doctor's office, but I'll try.
No worries.
Okay, I'm waiting. I'll get far away from people. I'm waiting.
It's okay. Elise, if you don't have to, if you can, we'd love for you to read text 13, confrontation.
Well, I'll do it. I don't think I'm bothering him. Am I bothering you? No, she can't even hear me.
So go ahead.
It's the one, the righteous Patoki.
Yeah, the righteous
from
Patoki.
Amsterdam to Lithuania.
Yes.
He spent every moment of his time engrossed in Torah study or prayer. His heart was completely devoted to Torah, and he would fast and subject his body to afflictions. His praises cannot adequately be told in writing. During prayer, his eyes would pour with rivers of tears. One day, this holy man came to the synagogue and saw a young man, the son of the local tailor, laughing, shouting, and wildly throwing his hat in the air in front of the synagogue's holy ark. Batoki was very Upset, and he scolded the young man. You insolent fellow, why aren't you showing respect for God? How can you stand in the synagogue in front of the ark with your head uncovered? Put your hat back on. The young man's wicked father was enraged, and he went to the local nobleman and told him, you should know that the lost son of the great nobleman Pataki is in our own town. Sitting in the synagogue, he has converted to Judaism, and he sharply denigrates your religion. Send officers to arrest him before he flees. The nobleman did as the wicked man advised him. He brought 300 officers, and they surrounded the town. They arrested Pataki and placed him in prison, bound in iron shackles.
Thank you,
Oh,
Elise.
that's
The
it.
punishment for converting to Judaism, which should be made clear, was the death penalty. And Avram tried to deny that he was indeed Valentin Potocki, but to no avail. He was brought to the prison in the main city of Vilna, where delegations of bishops came to try and persuade him to abandon Judaism and return to his Christian roots. But Avram steadfastly refused. His mother and relatives came to beg him to outwardly convert. Sound familiar, right? They were probably thinking of the Moranos and the conversos in Spain. To outwardly convert to Christianity, but continue even if he wanted, who cares? He would hear nothing of it. One legend even tells us that the Gaon of Vilna, for those of you that are familiar, right, the genius of Vilna, his name was Rabbi Eliyahu, that he sent a message. He was then only a young man of 29, but he was already a renowned scholar and he was a Kabbalist, that he sent a message, a secret message to this young Avraham ben Avraham, that he had knowledge of a Kabbalistic formulation of the divine name, that if Avraham would utter it, he would be able to miraculously escape from his cell. But the story goes that Avraham refused. He didn't want to make use of miracles in order to save his life, and he had no fear of dying for his commitment to Judaism. In text 14, we get the sad ending to this story. Ron, if you can read it for us, please, on page 31.
The ruling was given. Avram's tongue should be ripped out of his mouth, and he should be burned at the stake on the second day of Shavuot, the day of the giving of the Torah. He indeed rose to heaven on that day, and the Jewish people mourned bitterly the murder of this special man. All the Jews of Vilna prayed at home on that day, pouring copious tears. They peered through the shutters and saw him being led to the stake, his face shining like the sun. He went joyfully like a man dancing toward God's mountain.
So here is a man who as a young boy was not brought up Jewish. He chose to convert to Judaism, but his devotion to Judaism is so strong that he's willing to give up his life for it. And he does give up his life for it. And while he does so, he's not sad about it. He decides, you know what, if this is what Hashem wants me, this is what Hashem has in store for me, that's it. And he goes to his fate singing joyfully. Tradition relates that Avram went to his death singing the words of a prayer that is part of our daily morning prayers. It's text 15 in your textbooks. But instead of reading it, we are going to hear it, a more modern rendition of it, of the original tune, which was passed down generation to generation, of the singing of the words of this song. For those of you that are attendees of the weekly Sunday class, when we go through the Siddur, right, the Siddur Unpacked, we actually spoke about this when we spoke about this prayer. This is part of the preliminary prayers that we do before we start Hodu and Shol together. One of the prayers that we say is Aval anachnu amcha b'nei b'reisecha, and following this we say the words of the Shema, etc. And if you turn your attention to the video screens, you will hear and see the translation of the words to this song and the tune of this song as Graf Potocki, or Avraham ben Avraham, sang it on his way to his death.
The righteous convert Avraham ben Avraham was sentenced to death for converting to Judaism. Refusing all entreaties to abandon Judaism, he was burned at the stake in Vilna on the second day of Shavuot, 1749. The grave of Avraham ben Avraham in the old Vilna Jewish cemetery was a popular pilgrimage site for generations. This cemetery was destroyed by the Soviets in 1950. Tradition has passed down the tune with which Avraham sang, some of his final prayers.
אבל אנחנו עמך, בני וריסך, בני אברהם, אוהבך, שנשבעת לי בהר המוריה, זרע יצחק יחידי, שנקד על גבי המזבח. אבל אנחנו עמך, בני וריסך, בני אברהם, אוהבך, שנשבעת לי בהר המוריה, זרע יצחק יחידי, שנקד על גבי המזבח.
The prayer, which is text 15, titled Final Prayer, continues to go on as follows. The community of Jacob, your firstborn, therefore it is incumbent upon us to thank, praise, and glorify you, to bless you, to sanctify and to offer praise and thanksgiving to your name. Fortunate are we, how good is our portion, how pleasant our lot, and how beautiful our heritage. Fortunate are we who early in the morning and in the evening, twice each day, declare, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Sanctify your name in your world upon the people who hallow your name. Through your salvation, our King, raise and exalt our strength, and deliver us speedily for the sake of your name. Blessed is he who sanctifies his name among the multitudes. This prayer would have been most appropriate for that occasion. Think about it. Not only is he referencing times when Jews were willing to give their lives for Judaism, such as Isaac on the altar, but he's actually first of all, he's saying Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which famously Jews always said. For example, if you fast forward to the Holocaust, the last words on most Jews' lips were Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And then he's also making a blessing. The last words are Baruch HaMekadesh Shemo B'Rabim. Blessed is he who sanctified Hashem's name in public. And tradition has it that when he said this, he didn't just say Baruch. He said Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, a blessing including God's holy name, to sing on the mitzvah of sanctifying God's name. Listening to this beautiful and haunting melody, I think most of us can feel and hear the incredible devotion and stoicism that it expresses. But was this story true? Is it fact or is it legend? I'm not going to spend too much time on this. We're going to skip text 16 and text 16, which is a quote from a London magazine. You can see the actual copy, the original news report, on page 35, which tells the story. And it seems to be pretty clear that some version of this story was true. We also have a report from Rabbi Yaakov Emden, who lived a little bit afterwards, but still also confirms this story. So whether the story happened with all of the details here in 1755 is when he recounts the core elements of the story. Different names sometimes, different details, but the general idea being clear that there was a man who was a Polish nobleman and who converted to Judaism and was willing to ultimately give up his life for his devotion to Yiddishkeit. And this leads me to the conclusion of today's lesson. Judaism doesn't seek out converts, but conversion, the idea that over the course of history, there will be non-Jews who will attach themselves to Judaism and become converts, is very, very much found in Jewish literature. Let's go all the way back to the Talmud, text 17. Ron, if you can read for us, please.
God exiled Israel among the nations only so that converts would join them.
And this leads me to a point that I want to end off on. Conversion, and I know this also from some people that I was marketing the course to, they told me, okay, beautiful, there are converts to Judaism. What does that have to do with me? I have two Jewish parents. I was born to a Jewish family. I was brought up Jewish, etc. What is conversion of any relevance to me? It turns out that when it says that Hashem did not exile the Jewish people among the nations, if not for the one reason, which is that converts should join them, the meaning is, first of all, it's clearly not active. We're not supposed to be seeking out converts. It's so that converts should join them. It's passive, and it's supposed to happen on its own. It's also in addition to it telling us not to do so actively, it's also telling us about the importance of the role that these converts will play in Judaism. It's the entire purpose, no less than the entire purpose of exile. But Chassidus explains that on a deeper level, in addition to the literal meaning of this Talmudic statement, there's actually a much deeper idea as well, which is a version of conversion that even Jews can go through. And Ron, if you can conclude for us, please, with text 18 from Torah Chaim by the Mittler Rebbe, the second Chabad Rebbe, on page 37, text 18 is self-conversion.
Our sages taught that God exiled Israel among the nations only so that converts would join them. Beyond the literal meaning of actual converts, this teaching also has a deeper meaning that is relevant to every Jew. Our bodies and natural instincts are a blend of good and bad. Our natural condition from our youngest age is that we are controlled by our negative inclination. In the spirit of the verse, every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil and not good at all. However, we are created in the divine image. Our soul is a veritable piece of godliness. We are therefore empowered to transform our hearts and natural instincts so that they are devoted solely and truly to love and awe for God. We are also empowered to harness all our thoughts and actions to this end, and thereby fully accept the divine yoke of Torah and mitzvot. When we accomplish this, we are converts, having transformed ourselves and completely accepted divine authority.
Thank you. Chassidus often uses the terminology hagoy shebekirbecha, the inner goy, the inner non-Jew that a Jew might have within them. That there might be a part of them that's not so excited about being Jewish. There might be a part of them that wants to use my thoughts and my emotions and my thought, speech, and deed, and all of the parts that make up the human condition. I want to use them maybe for non-Jewish pursuits. I was born a Jew, I have the soul of a Jew, but I actually want to do other things. And in this way, every single one of us can be a ger, be'emes, a true convert, to convert those elements of our lives to actually truly desire to connect to Hashem. Just like a non-Jew who isn't necessarily born Jewish, but then converts, in other words, converts his desires to truly become devoted to Hashem. And as we see with the story of this ger tzedek of Vilna, of Avram ben Avram, lesson 1. Of Avram ben Avram, we see that he actually became so Jewish that even when it came to giving up his life, this became his identity. This became who he was. And every single one of us, if we choose to do so, we can actually take our inner goy, the part of us that's not so excited about Yiddishkeit, and we can use it to convert it to become the biggest catalyst for our growth every single day of our lives. Please turn your attention to the video screens for a summary of today's lesson.
Lesson 1. Courageous Converts. Narratives. 1. Onkelos was born into the Roman royal family shortly after the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in the 1st century CE. Attracted to the revolutionary Jewish concepts of a single God who cares for his people and guides them, Onkelos risked his life to convert to Judaism. He became the author of the first translation of the Torah, a monumental work studied until today. 2. Long-lost documents uncovered in the Cairo Geniza capture the fascinating story of an Italian priest named Johannes, who converted to Judaism in the early 12th century. Johannes became Ovadia and was forced to flee his home country in order to live as a Jew. He endured wanderings and difficulties in his life, but he enriched Jewish worship with his liturgical music. 3. Valentine Potocki was the brilliant young son of a Polish nobleman who converted to Judaism in the mid-18th century. Known by the Jewish name Avraham ben Avraham, he was arrested by the authorities in Lithuania and sentenced to death. He steadfastly refused offers to save his life if he returned to Christianity, and he went to his execution joyfully. The story of his incredible dedication and sacrifice has inspired generations of Jews. General points. 1. Unique among world religions, Judaism does not believe that non-Jews need to join it, and potential converts are actively dissuaded. Nevertheless, Judaism does accept converts who are persistent, with the understanding that these people possess a latent Jewish soul. 2. Converts to Judaism are considered to possess particularly powerful souls. Over the generations, converts have made unique contributions to Jewish life.
Thank you all for joining us for Lesson 1. This has been Courageous Converts, and we look forward to greeting you all next week for Lesson 2, Influential Jews.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You are very welcome.